Hey everyone, welcome to Coffee and Compete, the show about the news, gossip, and tactics of competitive business strategy. I'm your host, Adam McQueen. Join with me, as always, the guy at Klue that uses Klue. It's Hunter Stones. Hunter, what's going on, buddy?
Top of the morning, chilling and killing. Same as always.
New season, same quotes. I love it.
I really gotta switch it up for season 2. Maybe this will be the only time that I'm chilling and killing.
Yeah, I know. I think we're gonna have to come up with some new ones,
New
some new catchphrases for more merch lines. Before we get into our special guest, a quick update for folks in the community. We have another Power Half Hour session with none other than Josh Gladstone, resident battle card expert, connoisseur even. He'll be walking through how to build a deal-winning battle card. Josh helps hundreds of our customers build some of the best battle cards in the business. If you've been to one of his sessions before, it's a must attend. 30 minutes on a Friday, February 7th. Go check it out.
Bad to the bone, glad to the stone. You don't want to miss that one.
Give him an inch, you take him out. Anyways, enough of Hunter's puns. Let's get into our guest today because we're covering more win-loss content. And I am very excited to be joined by Alexis Yeh, Manager of Program Manager Associates at Klue. Alexis, what does your job title mean?
Good question. So I support, coach, mentor, drive metrics for a team of program management associates. That is the team of individuals who are responsible for interview recruitment on win-loss programs and making sure that we are scheduling the interviews to help drive those actionable insights on competitors, markets, products that all teams need.
And that is exactly why we have you on today to talk about generating interview pipeline, because every single win-loss session we do, regardless of the topic, whether it's sharing insights to your executive team, how to do an interview, anytime we do a session, we'll get responses after the fact, live attendees, audience questions. It's always, how the heck do I get people to book an interview with me in the first place? And so I'm very, very stoked to have Alexis join us and actually provide tactical how-to on doing this exact thing. Because this is the thing that people ask the most about win-loss. It's almost step 1, maybe step 2 in working with your program. So let's get into it to start with. First things first, how do you even identify who you want to interview? You've worked with so many different customers. There's probably so many different potential people they could go after. How do you even help a customer decide?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it comes to narrowing down to what your research scope is during the onboarding portion of your win-loss program building. So when you think about who you want to target for these win-loss interviews, you want to be specific to what actionable insights that you want to take away from the program. So if I knew X, then I could do Y, which would result in Z. To get at the answer of Z, you need to figure out who you need to talk to first. So that's where we like to think about the research segments and more specifically, who fits into that bucket to answer those questions. So first you want to start at a high level, right? Thinking about how many wins versus losses versus churns or renewal interviews do I want to do? The second thing you want to think about are the big picture topics that are important to your team. Perhaps you want to focus on opportunities that have closed in a particular region. Perhaps you want to focus on opportunities in a particular market segment or industry. There's a lot of different ways you can break it down. But the first thing is identifying what's important to you and maybe start with 1 or 2 of those topics. From there, you need to get more specific, of course, about who you're actually going to interview. And to keep it simple there, the best thing you can do is focus on the people that are involved in the evaluation and decision-making process. We don't want to interview the CEO, as insightful as they might be, if they weren't the person that was actually talking to the seller and getting all the insights about the product during the evaluation.
Interesting. When you think about okay, so you've kind of established the segments of different deals that you want to go after. What do you think makes a really good candidate, like if you had to break that down even further to say, these are the exact types of interviews within this particular segment that we want to pursue? How do you think about that?
So I think some of that comes down to working with your team internally. You want to make sure that your win-loss program isn't siloed and you're just making decisions based on what the CRM data is saying. Sure, that's step one of the process. You can build a list based on the different ways you can slice and dice the data from the CRM. But to take it to the next level, you're going to want to go back internally to your team, perhaps the VP of sales, VP of product, different stakeholders within the organization to see if there are any opportunities that are of specific interest to them for particular reasons. Perhaps head of CI knows that a competitor was heavily involved in a deal and it was really close up until the end of the sales cycle. Or perhaps there was a piece of product feedback that was really unique, but we don't have enough depth on or knowledge about from the sales cycle. And so there's an opportunity to get in and circle back and dig in deeper. So I think to answer your question there, it comes back to working with your team, get buy-in from other stakeholders in the organization, and see if they can help you prioritize the list and get it down to a size that's more appropriate for your outreach.
Speaking of buy-in, this is a good segue actually. I think when we hear from a lot of program owners, one of the biggest potential obstacles, but if you do it right, can be an unlock in terms of accessing potential interview participants is working with sales. Working with sales, I think there's many reasons why sometimes it can be a blocker, the perception that maybe win-loss is a deal review on the seller's performance themselves. There could be this sort of friction, I think, between the program owner, whether it's a product marketer, CI professional, marketing leader, whoever that is, and the seller that's responsible for the deal that has probably the closest access to great candidates. What are some of the ways that you've seen customers do a really good job of getting sales bought in to help that be less frictiony? Frictiony? Did I make up a word?
No, that's a
close
word.
enough.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's a common issue that people have to overcome when they start a win-loss program. A lot of times, if there's not already a culture of feedback within an organization, it might be perceived as a witch hunt. And so you have to make sure that you're proactive about that and you're setting the program up for success by sharing that this is feedback that's not necessarily to pinpoint all your flaws as the seller, but it's more of an opportunity to identify like what could we do differently so we can learn from those mistakes, and we can also learn from what went well within the opportunity. So when it comes to getting buy-in from sellers, there's a lot of different things you can do. The first thing I always recommend is doing a program announcement, making sure that everyone across the organization is aware that a win-loss program is about to happen. You're going to have someone reaching out to your prospects and customers asking for feedback on that evaluation process. And we're going to ask for feedback about their sales experience, the product, the marketing, etc. So first and foremost, big announcement. Some companies actually have success in doing this. Well, actually, let me take a step back there. Some companies have success doing that via Slack, Microsoft Teams, in just like a short message that they're posting. But other teams that have had success with it actually make an event out of it. And so they'll have an enablement session for their sales team where they're talking about win-loss. Sometimes if they have Klue win-loss supporting them, they'll actually bring in the research team so folks have an opportunity to ask all the questions they have about why we're doing this research, how it's going to be used, and so on. Other strategies people use for buy-in can vary across the organization. One of the best things you can do once you have at least 1 or 2 reports under your belt is actually distributing the report so people can see the type of feedback that they're getting and understand that there's value in it for them too.
I guess one thing I'm curious about too is once you've got sales bought into a certain degree, We've heard a lot about, there's some approaches where you get the seller to intro you to the buyer, whether it was a close won, close lost. And other times you might just want to reach out directly. Like, do you have a take on which one is best or which one might be best for different situations?
There are different approaches for different scenarios. I am a huge advocate for the sales first outreach approach because why wouldn't you leverage a relationship that already exists? It makes sense. But there are scenarios where sellers are busy. It's the end of the quarter. They have their heads down. They need to focus on closing deals, but you also really need those win-loss insights. So leveraging a leadership first approach can be more strategic at that point in time. I typically don't recommend going with a direct outreach approach because if it's a third party, of course, that's involved with the outreach process like Klue, your prospects and customers might not know who we are when we're extending an invite saying, hey, we want to connect with you and hear your feedback. So the invitation is typically best received when it's coming from a name they recognize or at least a domain they recognize.
I have a follow-up question around more of like the frequency of when you should be reaching out. Like one of the big challenges that a lot of CI folks run into is literally just you have more things to do than you have time for. So is it a best practice, would you say, to reach out to buyers and get those introductions through sellers sort of when the deal closes, like doing this on an ad hoc basis? Or is it better to sort of batch these into monthly or quarterly outreach? What's your take on that?
That is a good question. And I think the answer depends on each organization. Some organizations like to send us target lists on a weekly basis because they want to have small batches that they can go through, prioritize with stakeholders, and easily get that in front of us to have action taken, whereas others lean into the monthly approach or the quarterly approach. I do try to encourage folks to stay away from the quarterly approach because by the end of the quarter, there's so many things that have happened that it becomes this massive task that a program leader has to review all of the opportunities and vet them with stakeholders. And so it can take a lot of time in that moment to action it. And you're not getting all of your feedback on a continuous flow or a continuous basis. One of the nice things about using the monthly approach is that your list is typically a more manageable size once you have those filters and you can review it with stakeholders. Opportunities that close in that month are going to be more fresh on people's minds too. So it's easier for stakeholders to say, yep, I really want to review this deal because of XYZ reason. The other thing about monthly target list generation is that you're going to have that consistent flow of research. There's nothing worse than having no interviews for 2 months and then 10 interviews because you just get a pause. You don't get that the buildup and the consistency factor that's beneficial for making a successful win-loss program.
That's super helpful. Do you have anything else that you want to tap onto there?
I want Alexis's take on something Ryan said from a previous podcast. When Ryan was chatting with Hunter a couple of episodes ago, he talked about adding a nominate for win-loss interview field in the CRM when an opportunity passes a certain stage when it closes. What is your take on using something like this as a means to generate pipeline?
Heck yes, do it.
Why?
I highly recommend the CRM checkbox for sellers to say yes or no to including a win-loss opportunity in a target list because one, as a program leader, it's going to make your life a lot easier because you'll already have that sales buy-in on a particular opportunity. It'll also tell you if the deal is actually one that's worth being considered. Some deals just don't have a lot of depth to them, and they might not be worth a feedback interview. Sure, you could collect valuable feedback via survey, but it might not be worth the full interview. And so if you have a seller tell you that up front, then you don't have to do the behind the scenes process of digging into, is it worth it? Is it not worth it? It just saves a lot of time for various people across the organization if you add the checkbox in.
What I'm curious about though is, if you're someone in a large organization and you might not necessarily have influence over what can be, put into your close won, close loss CRM fields, what is a way that you can sort of like narrow down and like kind of take your best guess at what you think are going to be the better fit interview targets. Like examples I'm thinking about are like, do you go after deals that had a certain number of stakeholders involved or made it to a certain stage or something like that?
So I would say that's something a lot of organizations do challenge with, but when you have, I'm thinking of more like your enterprise customers where there are just a lot of people, you might have hundreds of sellers at the organization and you don't have time to connect with each person individually to figure out if it's a deal that's worth pursuing in a win-loss interview. So I think number one, that's where the research segments come back into play, where you need to know exactly what you're looking for from each opportunity and make sure it fits that base criteria. I think the second thing you can do in those scenarios is lean into different leadership teams. So perhaps there is a regional manager that you can touch base with that might say, okay, try working with this seller, so-and-so, because they've had some interesting opportunities come through over the last month. So that's one way you can lean into it. Sometimes we actually create nomination request forms, or I would even joke with some people, you could create like a win-loss warriors Slack channel type of thing, where if sellers want to nominate opportunities and hear feedback on their own deals, then they can actually submit requests to hear them. And then you can go through and see if there's particular qualifiers that meet the segment requirements you were looking for. When it comes to thinking about like the number of stakeholders involved, I haven't seen that done. But sometimes in your outreach emails, like if we're reaching out to sellers for a warm introduction, we'll include a smaller message just saying, hey, for this particular, or I should say, sometimes we'll reach out to sellers and we'll put a special note in there saying that, hey, we're really trying to prioritize this type of opportunity over the next 3 months. If your opportunity doesn't fit this particular criteria, can you let us know and we'll cancel it from the win-loss program, or we'll hold off on it until we need it at a future date.
How long have you been working in this win-loss space now, Alexis?
Been here for 4 years.
So over 4 years, what is one thing you've learned or that your perspective has changed on how to be more effective at recruiting interview pipeline? If we could go back to Alexis from 4 years ago to today.
I think this might sound like a no-duh thing, but we used to really lean into emails, and emails were the way you would ask for feedback. But we've expanded our approach to take more of that 360-degree way of connecting with people. And so we try connecting with people over phone calls or LinkedIn, social media, to get their attention and ensure that they know their feedback is requested and that it's not just another survey. This is a real chance to have their voice heard from the leadership team. I think the real value add there is that your voice is going to get heard. You're not just another number coming across the screen for the leadership team for people to report on, but your voice, your needs are going to be heard by the right people and hopefully addressed and influenced change in that company or even in that field at large.
What are your thoughts around the actual conversion rates for folks who are reaching out to prospective interview targets? Like, what would be good on a closed won kind of conversion rate side versus a closed loss side?
Depends on the customer and the industry that they're working in, right? But on average, across our win-loss customers, we see 60% conversion on wins, 30% conversion on losses, and about 25% conversion on churns. Again, those numbers can be influenced by the field that a particular company is in. On the higher side of that, of course, you see like your sales enablement platforms, whereas cybersecurity tends to be a little bit lower on the average side because those folks like to think every link is a phishing email. So you have to be really careful and cautious as you approach them.
Alexis, thank you so much for giving us your time, sharing some tips on what I think is easily the most popular win-loss question I've heard from our community, our audience, and our customers. And there's no doubt a couple of things I think folks can walk away with and implement tomorrow. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch everyone next week.